Chapter 250. Tossing, fighting, colliding, retreating, chasing. Once the war started, it couldn't stop until there was an end. For any force, this was a fierce and anxious battle. The war lasted from early morning to afternoon. The rainstorm had stopped, the sun rose, and the dim light gradually slanted to the west. The sunlight after the rain was not so clear and bright. The whole battlefield was filled with a strong and almost pungent smell of blood. The dried blood was still among the corpses, like a frozen river. The cannon fodder that East Island put into the battlefield had been wiped out, and the bodies were scattered in every corner inside and outside the village. The Jianghu family of South America, the Polar Ground Alliance, the Heroes Club, Knights Templars, and Fantasy World joined hands with East Island to take action a few hours ago. Experts of the Thunder-Shocking Realm started to join the battlefield, then experts at the peak of the Thunder-Shocking Realm, and finally experts of the Half-Step Invincible Realm showed up in person. Siege. Whether they were ordinary elites or real experts, everyone was sparing no effort to kill everyone in Jianghu State. The lightning swam in the raging fire, and the fire shot straight up to the sky. The moisture after the rain had been completely evaporated. It was almost evening, and the wind was blowing in Chengdao, but the battlefield was still extremely hot and depressing. Jianghu State had already suffered heavy losses, but the team of less than 2,000 people showed amazing tenacity in the face of the siege of all the superpowers. All the experts above the Thunder-Shocking Realm rushed to the front, and it could almost be described as scrambling to be the first. This kind of fanatical fighting desire, plus East Island, the ordinary elites of the 6 superpowers suffered heavy losses in the first charge of Jianghu State. The experts of the 6 superpowers had to stand at the front as well, to block the attack of Jianghu State. What was a decisive battle? When there was no way out, it was a battle of soldiers against soldiers, generals against generals, a battle of life and death. Some people died, and some people lived. The war had been going on for more than 10 hours, and the team of Jianghu State, which had nearly 2,000 people, had less than 800 left, and everyone was injured, but they still moved as fast as the wind. Forward. They kept rushing forward. There were enemies in all directions, which also meant that there were directions to break out of the encirclement. From beginning to end, no one in Jianghu State shouted to break out of the encirclement, and no one shouted to retreat. Similarly, they never broke through the enemy's barrier in any direction. The only achievement of Jianghu State was to cause several times more damage to the enemy than their own. The result was big, but also small. After all, no matter how much the enemy lost, it was also borne by the 6 families. Only the central continent kept losing blood. The war continued in indescribable anxiety and misery. There were fewer and fewer people in Jianghu State. There seemed to be only one path waiting for them. There was only defeat and death. The earth was stained with blood. The sky was vast and mighty. When the gentle and gorgeous afterglow of the setting sun shone down, the sky above the battlefield was suddenly filled with darkness. It was not the alternation of day and night after nightfall. When the darkness first appeared, it was just a tiny speck. The dim yellow sunlight shone on every corner of the battlefield. This speck of darkness that suddenly appeared was like a drop of ink under the light. Chaotic and sharp whistling sounds instantly erupted around the darkness. A huge sense of crisis suddenly enveloped the entire area. The great power fluctuating in the air was instantly swallowed up by the darkness, which expanded to hundreds of meters in the shortest time. Dead silence spread in the darkness, and a large number of elites of Jianghu State and the 6 superpowers were shrouded in it at the same time. In the center of the darkness was Shinichi Miyamoto. And opposite of him was Gong Sun Chi. After more than 10 hours of fighting, Gong Sun Chi, who was not in the Invincible Realm, held up the only expert in the Invincible Realm, Shinichi Miyamoto. The power that could change the whole situation was firmly contained. Gong Sun Chi was a little embarrassed and weak. But Shinichi Miyamoto, who was on the strong side, also did not play his due role. More than 10 hours. Shinichi Miyamoto's eyes were deep and cold. His close-fitting ninja suit had been torn, revealing his bleeding skin. But he stood in the darkness, exuding an almost violent killing intent. Nonentity. The darkness kept spreading. Shinichi Miyamoto stared in the direction of Gongsun Chi, with undisguised anger and killing intent in his voice. He raised his palm, and a large piece of darkness suddenly began to fluctuate wildly. The space of hundreds of meters suddenly broke into pieces and returned to nothingness. Go to hell. In the almost crazy killing intent, Shinichi Miyamoto's palm fiercely chopped down. Heaven and earth suddenly roared. Void stillness. Shinichi Miyamoto's strongest move was also a move that he tried his best. After more than 10 hours, he failed to take down Gongsun Chi. Shinichi Miyamoto only felt angry and humiliated. Anyone under the invincible realm was a nonentity. Otherwise, how could an invincible realm expert be called invincible? But Gongsun Chi had held him here for 10 hours. Shinichi Miyamoto, who had completely lost his patience, was completely furious. Even if he had to pay a price, he had to kill this famous Azure Dragon of Jianghu State, who was known as the strongest expert under the invincible realm. The domain of the invincible realm was fully opened in the dusk. The darkness was tumbling. The light was broken. Pure darkness instantly wrapped Gongsun Chi's body. Gongsun Chi's clothes kept glowing, and the subtle light became dimmer and dimmer in the darkness. Sound, light, power, and air were directly swallowed by the darkness. Shinichi Miyamoto's body shook, and he instantly crossed a distance of hundreds of meters. The power that belonged to the invincible realm directly burst out beside Gongsun Chi. The light on Gongsun Chi disappeared. He disappeared into the darkness without a sound. This was not Gongsun Chi's own ability, but the clothes he wore. For Spirit's armor, Azure Dragon. For Spirit's armor was one of the strongest individual defense equipment in Jianghu State. It could be repaired after being damaged, but it could not be copied. More than 80% of the four clothes were woven with cloud silk, and their defense power was unparalleled in the world. In addition, each of the four clothes represented a top technology of Jianghu State. In addition to being strong, the Azure Dragon armor's biggest feature was stealth. The essence of the top optical camouflage technology of Jianghu State was used on the Azure Dragon armor. Once Gongsun Chi, wearing the Azure Dragon armor, entered the state of battle, as long as there was light, his stealth was not inferior to that of an invincible realm expert. Day, night, and even the void. There was light. With the existence of light, if Gongsun Chi did not take the initiative to attack, no one could lock his position. Shinichi Miyamoto could not lock Gongsun Chi's position either. But he was fast enough. The void stillness was his vacuum domain. There was no air resistance in the vacuum. With the power of the invincible realm, he only needed one step to cross a distance of hundreds of meters. Gongsun Chi was stealth, but he actually existed. Since he could not catch his figure, he would destroy everything. Destroy. Shinichi Miyamoto's cold voice sounded before he could stabilize his body. The void stillness, destroy. The unparalleled power suddenly expanded in the darkness, and there was a clear cracking sound in the air. Light appeared in the darkness, and it seemed to be cracks. More and more cracks appeared. When the dim sun shone into the darkness, the domain of the invincible realm hundreds of meters around Shinichi Miyamoto suddenly began to explode. The black domain was completely broken. Black spots appeared in the air one after another. Countless lightning, fire, and frost hovered around a large number of black spots, and a hurricane followed. Shinichi Miyamoto did not move. But with this move of destruction, the area hundreds of meters around him instantly turned into a death zone. Fire, lightning, frost, and strong wind were flying. No one or thing could escape the devastation of this huge power. This was the invincible realm. It was the ultimate power after the four realms of martial arts were completely sublimated. Shinichi Miyamoto personally blew up his domain. So, chi commanding, ice condensing, fire flaming, and thunder shocking realm. The power of the four realms burst out at the same time. The battlefield was turbulent. It could destroy heaven and earth. Gongsun Chi's figure reappeared in the sky, which had been ravaged beyond recognition. His figure was still straight, but the next second, he suddenly staggered and almost fell from the sky. He spat out a mouthful of blood, and the azure dragon armor was already dim. His aura directly changed from strong to weak in a short time. He raised his head and looked at Shinichi Miyamoto, his body slightly trembling. "You're courting death." Shinichi Miyamoto's aura seemed to be a little weaker, but his voice was still indifferent and majestic. Gong Sun Chi smiled, as if he was mocking himself. He said, "If," he just said if and didn't continue. There was no if in the dark world. If he hadn't stopped at the half-step invincible realm because of the injury when he tried to break through to the invincible realm, Shinichi Miyamoto would have become a corpse now. But there was no if. It had become a fact that he had no hope of reaching the invincible realm in this life. Gong Sun Chi's eyes were a little helpless, sad, and emotional. He was also a big shot standing above the dark world, but after all, he couldn't take the last step to see the scenery at the top. If he couldn't break through, then he would fulfill his wish. Shinichi Miyamoto stretched out one hand. 100 meters away, he pressed down on Gong Sun Chi. The air that the sunlight passed through suddenly exploded, and a powerful force directly appeared in front of Gong Sun Chi. "Then I'll fulfill his wish," Gong Sun Chi said to himself. His body fell down. "Resist." A low and hoarse voice sounded. A large mass of air suddenly condensed and rotated in the sky that became dark again. Above the sky, the air was layered, and in the blink of an eye, a transparent cloud appeared. Shinichi Miyamoto pressed down with his palm, and the void reappeared. But the darkness hit the transparent cloud, but it couldn't break the thick air cloud. That was the scene after the chi-controlling realm broke through one peak after another. Tribulation appeared where Gong Sun Chi was. He looked at Shinichi Miyamoto and said calmly, "Fight." Shinichi Miyamoto's pupils contracted slightly. A new black void appeared and disappeared. The broken fragments of the invincible realm were still raging on the battlefield, with frost and lightning. Dongqing Rushi was also looking at the frost and lightning. In the light and shadow of the explosion all over the sky, the intertwined colors were so strong and gorgeous. The scattered power of the invincible realm kept exploding. The moment the blood and flesh splashed, they were destroyed by the power. The power was still raging after falling, with monstrous killing intent. Dongqing Rushi felt it was familiar. After the sublimation of the 4 realms of martial arts, it was the invincible realm. After the invincible realm was scattered, it was the 4 realms of martial arts. All kinds of light and shadow exploded in the air and on the ground, and the black spots fell. Every time they spread, the silent sword in Dongqing Rushi's hand would tremble slightly. Her eyes were no longer confused, but more beautiful and clear. Du Hanin, who was very close to Dongqing Rushi, was surprised to find that Dongqing Rushi was about to break through. A 19-year-old at the peak of the fire-flaming realm was breaking through. Was she in the half-step thunder-shocking realm? There was a violent roar in the air. Tribulation and Shinichi Miyamoto had already started fighting. The moment the void suddenly appeared, the extremely twisted gas cloud surged and exploded. The air and the void began to blend, and several transparent shadows appeared around Tribulation. An extremely fierce killing intent suddenly swept through the sky and the earth. On the ground, Dongqing Rushi suddenly clenched the silence in her hand. The long sword swept out with its scabbard, and Dongqing Rushi's figure directly burst out a dazzling sword light. The sword light was fierce and swift, and it rushed out dozens of meters in the blink of an eye. The silence kept ringing in the sword light. The team led by a fire-flaming realm expert from East Island was instantly torn into pieces by the sword light. This was not one of the sword movements that Dongqing Rushi specialized in, but it was also one of the 7 swords of Jade Pool. Aurora Glimpse. The flame with faint blue electric light spread with the sword light. After the heavy rain, Dongqing Rushi, who was stained with some mud because of the battle, stood with the sword in her hand, looking more and more beautiful like a fairy. A 19-year-old half a step to the thunder-shocking realm. Even in the era of Wang Xingxiao, Li Tianlan, Gu Hanzhan, and other young heavenly sons, Dongqing Rushi still had her own elegance. The sword light and the raging fire dissipated. A surging thunderbolt suddenly fell. The thunderbolt appeared in the distant sky. After a flash, it had already reached the top of Dongqing Rushi's head. Dongqing Rushi suddenly raised her head and raised her sword. The raging fire suddenly condensed into a straight line and rushed up to the sky. The fire and the lightning collided. In just a moment, the thunderbolt dispersed the raging fire and hit the silence. Dongqing Rushi's body shook violently. She was uncontrollably hit and flew out more than 10 meters away from the crowd around her. A figure appeared behind the bright thunderbolt. In just a flash, it was already close to Dongqing Rushi, who flew out. Demon. Thunder God, who had been near Dongqing Rushi, suddenly roared. Demon. The deputy palace master of Liuhua Palace, the top ninja in East Island, a superior a half-step to the invincible realm. Jianghu state was plotting against East Island. This time, there were too many valuable people. Not to mention the 3 young heavenly sons, Dongqing Rushi, whose father controlled the border control corps of Jianghu state, was also extraordinarily valuable to East Island. How could an ordinary person let the deputy palace master of Liuhua Palace take action in person? Flash. Demon, who was in tight clothes, seemed to be walking in the void. She was extremely fast. Everyone only felt dizzy, and then Demon's figure was already above Dongqing Rushi. A delicate short knife appeared in her hand. The short knife stabbed straight down. This knife was not enough to kill Dongqing Rushi, but it was enough to make her lose the ability to move instantly and then be captured by her. Stop. At the same time, not only Thunder God, but also by Yuming, Su Chu, Ning Qiansheng, Li Beidian, and Du Hanin rushed to Dongqing Rushi almost at the same time. These people were originally together. At first, they were also the ones who led the troops to charge toward Li Tianlan. At this time, even if they changed directions, they didn't separate. Dongqing Rushi's body was about to fall. Her eyes were still clear. Under the threat of the sharp edge of the short knife in Demon's hand, she suddenly reached out and was about to pull out the sword regardless of everything. The thunderbolt raged down and hit Dongqing Rushi's arm. Dongqing Rushi's arm suddenly fell down. Demon's soft and charming eyes suddenly lit up with excitement. She waved the short knife and stabbed down. She was a ninja a half-step to the invincible realm. Dongqing Rushi couldn't fight back at all when she suddenly made a sneak attack. Thunder God and the others were a little further away. At this moment, who could stop her? The person who could stop her was not in front of her. And in the sky? In the very distant void, the woman in white, who had been watching this fierce battle from beginning to end, was still hiding in the void, motionless. She had already returned the glittering and translucent dagger with golden patterns to her waist. The battle continued. The rain stopped, and the sun rose. Time passed. From early morning to dusk, she didn't move, just watching quietly. Most of the time, she was looking at Li Tianlan. Occasionally, she would look at the battlefield. But intentionally or unintentionally, her eyes would always quietly sweep over one place on the battlefield. Even though no one had noticed her, her gaze seemed to be a little guilty, and she seemed to be avoiding eye contact. At the moment when the sun was about to set, she took another look. The sharp edge of the Aurora Glimpse sword lit up. The raging fire and the thunderbolt flickered faintly in her sight. Until the evil spirit descended with that shocking bolt of lightning. A sharp light suddenly flashed in the woman in white's eyes. Dongqing Rushi's body was hit and flew out. Demon was above Dongqing Rushi. The woman in white's body suddenly tightened. The dagger at her waist didn't tremble, but the long sword behind her suddenly unsheathed. The snow-white edge of the sword flashed. A seemingly subtle sword intent instantly broke through the confinement of heaven and earth. Demon stabbed the dagger in her hand without hesitation. Before the dagger fell, the sword intent had crossed a distance of thousands of meters. Puff! There was no sound, no defense. The sharp sword intent directly rushed into the back of Demon's head and directly annihilated Demon's vitality in the shortest time. The dagger was released from her hand and fell into Dongqing Rushi's hand. Dongxing Rushi caught the dagger and looked at Demon, who fell on the ground with a frightened face, her eyes confused. From a distance of thousands of meters, a sword intent killed a half-step invincible realm expert. The moment the sword intent appeared, Gong Sun Chi, who had fallen on the ground, seemed to notice something. He suddenly raised his head and looked at the void where the woman in white was. Tribulation and Shinichi Miyamoto, who were fighting, also slightly stiffened. Firmament frowned. The void where their eyes met, intentionally or unintentionally, had already calmed down. In another direction, the white-robed woman silently reappeared in the slightly distorted space. She looked at Li Tianlan again. The slightly floating wind lifted the layer of white veil on her face. The white dress and the veil were dancing. His fairy-like appearance was like a banished immortal. 24 moves of sword. On a high hillside in the north of the battlefield, the moment Demon was killed by a sword, two figures, one black and one white, were moved at the same time. The first super master of Samsara Palace, Saint, was wrapped in a black cloak. Beside him was Daybreak, who was in white clothes and white shoes. Saint's eyes were also looking at the place where the woman in white disappeared. He frowned with a serious face and said, "Who's there?" Daybreak, who was even more shocked than Saint, turned his head as if he had seen a ghost. He looked at Saint and frowned. "Not your palace master?" In the battle with Gu Xingyun, the master of Samsara Palace used 24 moves of sword to conquer Gu Xingyun's 10 skills of true martial arts. It was no secret in the dark world. No. Saint was silent for a while and shook his head. First, she resisted the blow of Blue Sky Underworld, and then she was hit by Wang Tianzong's sword. After the battle with Gu Xingyun, she was injured. He said calmly, "Now the palace master can't take action. I can roughly guess the injury of the master of Samsara Palace." Daybreak narrowed his eyes. Now the palace master is seriously injured, but at least she still has the power to make a blow. Just now. Saint still shook his head and said calmly, "She used that blow." Daybreak's face finally became pale. He looked at the direction where the woman in white disappeared. After a long silence, he said calmly, "Who could it be?" Saint didn't say anything. He majored in swordsmanship. Therefore, he could clearly feel how terrifying that sword strike was. That sword was silent, but it seemed to tear heaven and earth in an instant. He couldn't do it. Ordinary invincible realm experts couldn't do it either. 24 moves of sword, Daybreak murmured to himself. He suddenly frowned and seemed to think of something. He sneered and said, 24 moves of sword. His tone was a little gloomy, a little angry, a little cold, and his whole person seemed to become indifferent. 24 moves of sword was the secret of the Li family and the Lin clan. In this dark world, how could there be so many experts who could use 24 moves of sword and could use them so well? "Do you have any clues?" Saint suddenly asked. "No." Daybreak shook his head. His handsome and almost demonic face was completely twisted, and killing intent flashed in his eyes. "I just have some guesses." Saint was puzzled. Daybreak took a deep look at him. Thinking of his position, he smiled and said blandly, "It should be a woman." "What woman?" Saint was more and more confused. "Damn woman." Daybreak replied with a cold face. The setting sun went down in the west. The night of the 7th day began to fall. There were less than 500 people in Jianghu state. Fire-flaming realm experts began to die. Thunder-shocking realm experts began to die. Dongxing Rushi and the others did not return to the main force. As soon as Demon died, East Island suddenly strengthened its offensive. The experts and elites of the other 5 superpowers also surrounded them at all costs. The crowd was surging, the killing moves were frequent, and the fierce attacks were fierce. A large number of people almost broke up the remaining troops of Jianghu state. Sai City, Eastern Theater of Operations, Mount Shu, Bai Yuming, Thunder God, Dongxing Rushi, Su Chu, and the others were still together. In the other direction, the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City were also together. They could not meet. A large number of people were approaching crazily. When there was a huge gap in strength, the so-called morale could not play a decisive role at all. The scattered people of Jianghu state began to retreat. Or rather, he was being chased away. All the way to the north. The camp of the Jiang family of South America was in the north. Li Tianlan was also in the north. Further north was a small piece of mountainous land. Behind the mountainous land was the edge of the battlefield, which was the sea. The battlefield moved to the north, getting closer and closer to Saint and Daybreak. Saint and Daybreak were still watching the battlefield in silence, calm and collected. He's dying. Daybreak, who had calmed down, suddenly said, he's an arrow at the end of its flight. If he doesn't make a move now, I'm afraid it'll be too late. Saint narrowed his eyes and looked at the battlefield. In the northernmost position of the battlefield, countless elites of the Jiang family of South America were surrounding a young man in white. White. Silver halberd. Swift and fierce, unparalleled decisiveness. Li Tianlan was still fighting. In the 10-hour battle, East Island, the Polar Ground Alliance, the Heroes Club, Fantasy World, Knights Templars, the Jiang family of South America, and countless elites fell under the silver edge. Among the enemies in all directions, he was moving forward step by step. More than 10 hours. He still did not see the person in charge of the Jiang family of South America this time. But as Daybreak said, at this point, he was really an arrow at the end of its flight. Saint said, and did not say anything. You don't make a move? Daybreak turned to look at Saint, looking surprised. Not interested. Saint said calmly. Daybreak's expression changed from surprise to astonishment. He had thought of many possibilities, but he never thought that when Li Tianlan was about to fall, in this situation, Saint would say that he was not interested in saving Li Tianlan. What the F***ck? Daybreak shook his head in confusion and chuckled. That's interesting. If your boss knows, I'm here to carry out the task my boss gave me. Saint said in a low voice, and there was also some confusion in his voice. Task? Daybreak looked at Saint. Isn't your task to protect Li Tianlan? Don't pretend. Since you're here, I guess the other super masters of Samsara in East Island are not far from Li Tianlan now. If you don't make a move now, don't go too far. Protect Li Tianlan? Saint murmured and then shook his head. No, it's not. If I'm right, that should be your task. Your Highness gave you the order to protect Li Tianlan, right? Daybreak's expression froze. Before he spoke, Saint said calmly, but we are not. So your task and mine are different. The mysterious Highness gave Daybreak the order to protect Li Tianlan. But the task the boss gave him and the other super masters was completely different. Their most important task. It was to protect Li Tianlan's corpse. Yes, the corpse. What the hell do you want to do? Daybreak's face darkened. He thought of a possibility. Saint didn't answer his question. If you do this, aren't you afraid? No. Saint interrupted Daybreak and said calmly and confidently, everything is under the boss's control. Daybreak was so angry that he laughed. He turned around and looked to the north. The battlefield was getting closer to the north. From the perspective of Daybreak and Saint, the battlefield was in the south, and the sea was in their north. The night covered the long island. The tide rose and fell by the sea. A light lit up on the sea, which seemed to be far and near. It was very high, like a lighthouse. The light, like a lighthouse, rushed to the sky and then suddenly exploded. There was no sound on the sea. But the bright light lit up the night and didn't disappear for a long time. In the battlefield, the camp of East Island suddenly burst into cheers that shook the sky. Everyone's morale was greatly boosted. As if they were responding to the cheers. A long roar suddenly came from the sea and went straight into the night sky. The long roar was full and powerful, with sword intent and strong wind, stirring the night. The signal flare that rose in the night fell. The winds suddenly blew on the sea, and the sword intent soared to the sky. Saint and Daybreak looked at the sea in silence. "It's coming," Daybreak said. The distance was too far, so he couldn't distinguish the sword intent on the sea, but he could completely feel the momentum. In the entire East Island, there was only one person who could stir the sea with sword intent. Wuxia Xianxia, the sect master of Jifeng Sword Raining School, the Invincible Realm Grand Master. He was here, and Tianhai Wuji, the palace master of Wuji Palace, would definitely be with him. The first batch of East Island experts trapped in Huading had begun to return. And it was probably the strongest batch. There were less than 300 people in Jianghu state. Daybreak turned around resolutely and rushed to Li Tianlan's direction. Saint stood where he was, looking at the Jianghu state team that was getting smaller and smaller, motionless. The wild wave was coming. The wild wave was about to fall. Chapter 251. The neat and orderly formation of Jianghu state was finally in chaos. No matter how elite or superior they were, under such circumstances, it was impossible for them to be as strong-willed as a mountain. After more than 10 hours of fierce fighting, there were less than 300 elites left from less than 2,000 people. He was still surrounded by enemies in all directions, densely packed together. The elites of East Island cheered and charged forward. A long whistle with strong sword intent swept over from the North Sea. The remaining troops of Jianghu state were forced to enter the mountain area. The mountain area was only a kilometer from the coast. The weaker their side was, the stronger the enemy was, the closer they were to death. This was a desperate picture, and there was no light at all. The morale of the army began to shake and gradually collapse. The team of less than 300 people faced enemies several times more than them, and the casualty rates suddenly skyrocketed. The real superiors were still fighting. But in front of the general trend, a country was like grass, and the invincible realm was like a nonentity. No one could save the situation. The battle between Tribulation and Shinichi Miyamoto continued, but it was no longer a one-on-one fight. Tianyu, the high priest of ISE Grand Shrine, appeared in the battle group, and his figure was looming. Shinichi Miyamoto, who was suppressing Tribulation, attacked more and more violently. Every time Tianyu's figure appeared, he would add a deep wound to Tribulation. Blood spilled in the air. Holy Light, the head of the 8 Knights of Knights Templars, directly confronted Gu Zhendong, the superior of the half-step invincible realm of Kunlun City. The 10 skills of true martial arts and the secret skills of the Vatican collided violently. Light and thunder burst out at the same time, and the night in a large area was as bright as day. Wang Xingxiao encountered King Bear of the Polar Ground Alliance. After the second evolution, his wind and thunder veins became more and more perfect in terms of speed and strength. However, in the face of King Bear's terrifying strength, which was infinitely close to the invincible realm, even though Wang Xingxiao could barely hold on, he began to lose ground after a short fight. That was the gap of an era. It had nothing to do with talent or aptitude, but time. The 2 guards of the royal family, Glacier and Tide, targeted the ice crystal and frost sword of Kunlun City. The 2 superiors of the half-step invincible realm suppressed the 2 superiors of the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. The moment the coldness of the ice crystal and frost sword bloomed, they were forcibly suppressed. The bright sword light shattered the night, whistling across the night sky, and one of Ice Crystal's arms fell directly with blood. It could be said that Firmament and Ben's eyes reddened when they saw each other. The Wang family of Beihai and the Heroes Club were old enemies. On the battlefield where the enemy was clearly distinguished, the 2 went all out and killed crazily as soon as they fought. The battlefield between the 2 of them moved directly from the front to the back of Jianghu state. Ben was fighting desperately, pushing Firmament away from Wang Xingxiao, who was suppressed by King Bear. Enchantress and Black Pupil were also moving. Although there were no superiors of the half-step invincible realm around them, there were more than 5 superiors of the thunder-shocking realm. Bai Yuming had temporarily retreated from the battlefield because of serious injuries. Thunder God was still struggling. Beside him were Deep Dream and Su Chu. The power of Sai City and the Dongqing clan had long stood together. But on the vast battlefield, this powerful force in the past was like a lonely boat in a tsunami that could be capsized at any time. The eastern theater of operations was almost completely wiped out. At the last moment of the war, Ning Qianqing found that there were less than 10 fire-flaming realm experts from the eastern theater of operations who came from Jianghu state to Changdao. The crowd was surging. The slaughter continued. In the eastern theater of operations, the remaining forces of the Dongqing clan and Sai City began to gather. And in front of them was Mount Shu. The swordsmen of Mount Shu also suffered heavy casualties. The yin and yang sword master Han Chongyang and Li Beidian stood together. The black and white broad-edged yin and yang sword had been completely unsheathed. The sword radiance was like thunder. Hardness and softness, attack and defense, life and death. The brilliant sword radiance kept flowing all over Han Chongyang's body. The sword intent was exquisite and almost perfect. Endless lightning surged down like a raging river. The people of the Dongqing clan, the eastern theater of operations, and Sai City followed behind Mount Shu. The yin and yang sword vibrated slightly, and the amazing lightning flowed and spread, immediately wrapping and protecting all the people of the three forces. Han Chongyang was moving forward. Crow and the elites of the fantasy world behind him were retreating. Han Chongyang's expression was calm and solemn. He gently raised the yin and yang sword. The yin and yang sword intent gathered from the sword edge without reservation. Han Chongyang held the long sword with both hands. A large amount of blue lightning burst out the moment he raised the long sword. Two different sword intents blended perfectly in the lightning, but Han Chongyang's palms had separated. The yin and yang sword with a wide blade disappeared, and two thin swords, one black and one white, appeared in Han Chongyang's hands. Yin and yang sword. Yin and yang swords. Han Chongyang had been the yin and yang sword master of Mount Shu for nearly 16 years. This was the first time he had successfully separated the yin and yang swords. The sword intent was mighty. Han Chongyang's aura sword. After this battle, if he didn't die, 3 of the 4 sword masters of Mount Shu would be in the half-step invincible realm. On the battlefield today, an expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm had crossed the limit and become an expert of the half-step invincible realm. For Jianghu state, he could definitely be regarded as a strong aide. But even if he was a strong aide, he couldn't turn the situation around. There were less than 200 people left in the team of Jianghu state. More than 100 people with the strongest combat capability, the greatest influence, and the most valuable. The general trend had been decided. Jianghu state. The country with the most powerful comprehensive national power in the world was about to suffer the heaviest loss in the dark world in recent decades. In the dark night. Before dawn. The plan of the whole country was exchanged for the most painful failure. It was irreversible. Countless enemies gathered together, drove, and chased the elites of Jianghu state all the way to the north. All of the hope and dawn became dim and illusory in the deep night. There was only despair in Jianghu state. More than 100 of the most powerful combat capability were forced to retreat to the north. On the hillside in the north, Saint turned around and changed his position. The sound of tide gradually rose by the sea. The long roar that surged on the sea finally became clear. The sword intent passed through the waves with the gale, and a figure rushed directly to the battlefield like a stream of light. The low and cold voice echoed between heaven and earth with the surging waves. Raining sword with wind. Raining sword with wind. The roar of thousands of troops and horses burst out from the ground at the same time, and countless cheers were boiling. The sword light in the air swept over the sea and the hillside, without slowing down at all, and went straight into the battlefield. The sword light suddenly became extremely bright in the night. The sword light rushed into the crowd with the sudden gale. In the completely condensed dazzling lightning, blood suddenly flew. The endless lightning disappeared. The blazing light also began to dissipate. The sword light closed. Wuxia Xianxia, the Kendo Grand Master of East Island in a kimono, appeared in the night sky. Beside him, the half-step invincible realm expert of Kunlun City, Gu Zhendong, had completely stiffened. His body moved with difficulty, and before he could say a word, his whole body directly burst into a cloud of blood mist. The blood mist sprayed on Holy Light, the Grand Knight of Knights Templars. Holy Light, who was covered in blood, bowed slightly to Luxing Xianxia and said calmly, "Welcome back, Your Highness." Luxing Xianxia squinted at Holy Light, as if he wanted to take action, but finally, he flicked his wide sleeves and said calmly, "Kill them all." "No." A sharp scream suddenly rang out on the ground. King Bear's almost violent roar responded to the scream. In front of him, Wang Xingxiao, the heir of the Wang family of Beihai, flew out, and Black Pupil's figure flew into the air. The enchantress's scream was shrill and helpless. Her body flew into the air, but the huge King Bear arrived in front of Black Pupil first. Black Pupil raised her head with blood on the corner of her mouth. The pupils without white were as dark as ink. She glanced over the battlefield, saw the blood, saw the chaos, but did not see the man who deserved her to give everything and betray everything without regret. Wang Xiaoyao was not on the battlefield, not by his side, and never by his side. The corner of Black Pupil's mouth moved. She did not have time to say the name, and King Bear's huge fist had directly hit her. Puff! Blood gushed out of her mouth, and the heart of this expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm of the Wang family of Beihai was smashed by a punch. Her body fell from the air, and the pupils without white looked straight at the night sky. After the heavy rain, it was a clear night. The starry sky was bright. Brighter than her pupils. Luxing Xianxia, who saw all this with his own eyes, curled his lips cruelly and whispered to himself, "When everything is over, it will be time for our 6 forces to conquer Zhongzhou state together." He took a step forward in the air and subconsciously wanted to rush to the seriously injured Wang Xingxiao. An extremely powerful and abundant aura suddenly burst out in the night. Luxing Xianxia suddenly turned his head and looked at the northernmost part of the battlefield. He frowned. There seemed to be the direction of the Jiang family of South America. There were 2 white figures moving forward in the camp of the Jiang family of South America. One of them was so young that Luxing Xianxia felt weird. He had reached the deepest part of the camp of the Jiang family of South America, but he was already an arrow at the end of its flight. He staggered and seemed to fall at any time. The white shadow that had broken into the camp of the Jiang family of South America in the rear was so strong that even Luxing Xianxia felt shocked. The white shadow swept all the way. In the camp of the Jiang family of South America, everyone, whether in the fire-flaming realm or the thunder-shocking realm, almost fell down without resistance. The breath emitted by the white shadow was getting stronger and stronger. Luxing Xianxia stared at the other side's strange and cold handsome face. He found that he did not know such an expert, and he had never seen the breath on him. It was a completely strange martial arts. A completely strange expert. Luxing Xianxia felt a little uneasy for no reason. His figure flashed, and the next moment, he directly stood in front of the white shadow. Get lost. The white shadow didn't seem to look at Luxing Xianxia. He casually punched him with a majestic power. Luxing Xianxia punched him with a poker face. The violent power bombarded together. The lightning and the twisted air suddenly burst a large area of the surrounding space. All the experts of the Jiang family of South America nearby were completely swallowed by the huge power in an instant. Luxing Xianxia's face became more and more serious. The white shadow's body slightly retreated a few steps. "Who are you?" Luxing Xianxia asked with a serious face. He was sure that he had never encountered the weird way of exerting force in the fight just now. "Who am I?" The white shadow's pupils contracted. Looking at Luxing Xianxia in front of him, he sneered and said, "Daybreak, Lord of Sanluo Temple." Luxing Xianxia's eyebrows furrowed more tightly. Before that, he had never heard of any force named Sanluo Temple. When he was about to speak, a cold and proud female voice suddenly sounded and shrouded the crowd of the Jiang family of South America. Li Tianlan. This voice came abruptly, and it was filled with cruelty and pleasure. There seemed to be the sound of chains in the night sky. Daybreak and Wuxia Xianxia suddenly raised their heads. In the crowd, Li Tianlan, who had almost lost his mind, also raised his head. Two figures suddenly appeared in the night sky. There seemed to be a fragrance in the air that made him yearn for it. A beautiful woman that Li Tianlan had never seen before appeared in the air. She looked at him with strange coldness and cruelty. She held a chain in her hand, and the other end of the chain was firmly wrapped around the neck of another figure. That was a figure that could make the starry sky pale and the battlefield silent. A white dress, perfect like a dream. Qin Weibai. That was Qin Weibai. The dark chain was tightly wrapped around Qin Weibai's snow-white neck. Behind her, Moonlight, who was holding the chain, restrained her strength. Qin Weibai, who had lost the power to float in the air, suddenly fell from Moonlight. The dark chain was tightened at the moment when Qin Weibai fell. The chain tightly strangled Qin Weibai's neck. Her body swayed in the air, miserable and cold. Moonlight smiled cruelly. In the air, she hung Qin Weibai's neck with the chain and kept pulling it. Qin Weibai's body swayed in the air, and there was a large bloodstain on her neck. Look at this woman. Moonlight looked at Li Tianlan with a sneer and said, "In my hands, your woman is like a dog. I can hang her at any time. Come on, come to save her. Come to save this beautiful bitch in my hands. As long as you have the strength." Li Tianlan's muddle-headed eyes suddenly became blood red. A crazy scream like that of a dying beast suddenly came from the whole battlefield. That was the rage that seemed to obliterate all emotions and reason. Chapter 252. No words could describe Li Tianlan's anger. The white clothes were still swaying in the night sky under the restraint of the chain. Hundreds of meters away, Moonlight stood at the other end, and in the middle were the remaining elites of the Jianghu family of South America. The numb body regained consciousness, and the muddle-headed will was completely concentrated. The silver human emperor turned into a sky halberd again, and the scarlet crescent-shaped spear blade stretched outward. Rushing forward. Regardless of everything. Li Tianlan's eyes had turned from blood red to dark red. All reason and judgment had completely disappeared. Battlefield, night, starry sky, crowd, glory, responsibility, grudges, hope, everything in front of him was falling apart. All the burdens on his body were disappearing. In the whole world, there was only the helpless figure hanging in the air by the chain. It was still perfect and dreamy, but a little sad and beautiful. Li Tianlan's roar almost turned into a wail. The great pain in his heart turned into extremely twisted hatred and anger, and a large number of attacks fell on him as he moved forward. Frost, raging fire, and raging thunder. The white clothes made of cloud silk absorbed most of the power, but the remaining power kept hitting Li Tianlan's body. Blood flowed from inside the white clothes, all over his body. Li Tianlan only had an almost instinctive thought. Even if he died, he would let her live. So he rushed forward fearlessly and decisively. The white figure rushed through the frost, the raging fire, and the dense curtain of thunder and lightning was left behind by him. The saber light and the sword shadow kept whistling and flashing in front of him. He just rushed forward crazily. His woman was there. He didn't care about the mountain of knives, the sea of fire, or the end of fate. Before the shrill, scalp-numbing howl of anger completely dissipated, Li Tianlan had rushed forward nearly 30 meters. The dense light and shadow were broken and dazzling. Blood gushed in the light and shadow. The white clothes were getting farther away. In the position slightly to the south, the black and white sword light of the yin and yang sword suddenly rose to the sky. The entire remaining camp of Mount Shu and Sai City began to crazily attack the Jianghu family of South America. Daybreak, who was also in white, directly bypassed Wuxia Xianxia, looked at Li Tianlan's back, and shouted, "Come back." As soon as his body moved, Wuxia Xianxia appeared in front of him again. Temple Master Sun Luo? Wuxia Xianxia sneered at Daybreak. His eyes were dignified and sarcastic. You can't go anywhere. Get lost. Daybreak's handsome and almost devilish face became distorted because of anger and eagerness, and his hair stood on end. Hand seal. It seemed that the light in the world was gathering, and it also seemed that daybreak was breaking out. Endless lights suddenly burst out from Daybreak's body. Galaxy seal. The light was like a raging tide, spreading out in an instant. Daybreak rushed to Wuxia Xianxia with mighty light. This was a pseudo-domain. Wuxia Xianxia's pupils shrank instantly and he pulled out his sword without hesitation. A huge wave of power instantly spread in all directions. The sword light and the light of the Milky Way seal flew into the sky at the same time. The second seal of Daybreak had been completed. Heavenly Punishment Seal. The clear starry sky suddenly rumbled with thunder, and the radiance of the galaxy seal began to scatter. The starlight receded, and a bolt of lightning that extended hundreds of meters across the sky instantly cut through the battlefield. Rolling thunder. The lightning as vast as the sea surged down without any warning. The lightning all over the sky gathered at one point, and there seemed to be a huge funnel condensed by lightning in the clear night sky. All the light fell on Wuxia Xianxia with crazy killing intent. The more complicated hand seal of the third style of Daybreak had come to an end. This was not a single style. It was a comprehensive style. Collection of all things. The noisy and tragic battlefield suddenly became quiet. All the sounds disappeared completely. In the lightning, Wuxia Xianxia's sword light quietly broke. All the attacks and shadows nearby were broken at the same time. There was no lightning around Daybreak, and all the air around him was spinning wildly in front of him. Wuxia Xianxia's sword light, all the attacks and shadows nearby turned into an indescribable majestic power, which was integrated into the spinning air by Daybreak. He turned the power of heaven and earth into his own use. This was the real collection of all things. Heaven and earth could be used, not to mention other people's attacks. Daybreak's mouth began to bleed, and the spinning air in front of him had become a huge vortex. The sword intent as vast as the sea kept coming in and out of the vortex, and the power from the outside world was gathering crazily. The vortex had grown to hundreds of meters in an instant. Wuxia Xianxia's sword was broken, and the other sword was not out. Daybreak, who was bleeding from the corner of his mouth, had suddenly raised his hand. With the attack of collection of all things, the power of heaven and earth, Wuxia Xianxia's own sword light, and the power of all the people nearby in an instant. The violent air vortex directly pressed on Wuxia Xianxia. Boom! There was a sudden violent roar on the battlefield. The air vortex completely exploded. Lightning, flames, ice walls, and twisted air crazily crowded and exploded. All the enemies within the area of nearly 100 meters, including Wuxia Xianxia, were swallowed up at the same time. A huge pit of hundreds of meters appeared in the battlefield, covered by countless lights and shadows. Daybreak did not look at the result, turned around, and rushed directly to Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was still moving forward. Qin Weibai, who was hanging in the void with moonlight, began to retreat. The distance was getting farther and farther, which made people desperate. There were still lights and shadows in front of him. Dense lightning bloomed in front of him and hit him. The activity of the cloud's silk robe began to fade gradually. The injury was getting worse. Li Tianlan had gone completely crazy. The sky halberd was raised above his head in the sky full of lights and shadows, and he fiercely chopped down. The lightning was smashed in an instant. The moment the light disappeared, a dim longsword suddenly pierced through the night sky. The sword edge went straight. Swish! The cloud silk robe, which had lost most of its activity, shook quietly, but the sword edge had fiercely pierced through the cloud silk and directly into Li Tianlan's abdomen. The sword edge went through his body, from front to back. The dim silver edge in the air fell straight down. In front of Li Tianlan, the thunder-shocking realm expert who succeeded in a sneak attack did not have time to retreat. The human emperor had directly chopped down and directly smashed him into pieces. Attacks from all directions fell on him at the same time. Li Tianlan's face was expressionless. He pulled out the long sword from his abdomen with one hand and swung the sky halberd with the other. Raging flames rose in the crowd, and the silver edge cut through almost everything. Several heads flew out with blood. The elites of the Jianghu family of South America remained silent. They attacked in silence. Cold and gloomy. Li Tianlan looked into the distance. Moonlight's figure had stopped. She pulled Qin Weibai up again and let her stand beside her. The black chain was still wrapped around Qin Weibai's neck. The black chain, the white dress, the red blood, and the clear black and white eyes. Qin Weibai was also looking at her. The light in her eyes was flowing with weakness, as if she had 1,000 words to say. The drooping sky halberd was suddenly raised. The heavy weapon whistled through the wind and thunder. Kill! Blood flowed down Li Tianlan's body. He gasped deeply, gritted his teeth, and growled. The elites of the Jianghu family of South America just wanted to go up again. I'll do it. A voice suddenly rang out. All the elites of the Jianghu family of South America took a few steps back and saluted in one direction. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. In his sight, a middle-aged man in his late 40s slowly walked over with a long sword hanging at his waist. He looked at Li Tianlan with excitement and pity in his eyes. My name is Raining Sword. The middle-aged man spoke. The voice was playful. Do you want to save the second madam? The second madam? Li Tianlan asked back and spat out a mouthful of blood. It's Qin Weibai. From today on, she is the second madam of the Jianghu family of South America. Raining Sword said seriously. That's my woman. Li Tianlan slowly wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and said in a cold tone. Oh, she's someone else's now. Raining Sword laughed and looked at Li Tianlan. What a fool. You're so desperate. But I like it. Without you, our task would not be complete. Now it's all right. You still want to save her? Look, do you deserve such a woman? Only the second master of the Jianghu family of South America deserves her. You. Go to hell. Li Tianlan, who no longer cared about psychological tactics, suddenly straightened his body. The sky halberd raised a sharp arc in the air, and the monstrous sword intent suddenly took shape as the sky halberd was raised. A trace of gorgeous dusky yellow suddenly appeared in the night sky. The ninth blade dusk. The sky halberd chopped down sharply, and the sword intent was surging. Raining Sword's eyes were cold. He raised his head and quietly watched the sky halberd falling. At the moment when the sword energy was about to fall on his head, he suddenly reached out. He drew his sword. A sword light as bright as the sun and the moon burst out in an instant. The dim yellow in the air dissipated, and only the bright light rose up. There was no raging fire, no thunder, only sword light. Such an expert could almost be said to have gone beyond the scope of the half-step invincible realm. He was only a step away from entering the invincible realm. He was a top expert. The bright sword light swept over the sword intent and the sky halberd. A piece of silver edge flew out directly. The human emperor was cut in half by the sword light. The weapon that had accompanied Li Tianlan for many years now only had a piece left. Li Tianlan's expression was stiff. Looking at the remaining half of the human emperor in his hand, he seemed to be in a daze. Raining Sword, who easily cut the human emperor in half, took a step forward and kicked Li Tianlan's chest directly. Li Tianlan's body suddenly flew backward more than 10 meters, and his indomitable momentum was forcibly stopped. It's almost time. Raining Sword's figure flashed and directly grabbed Li Tianlan. In an instant, his figure appeared beside Moonlight. Moonlight bowed her head respectfully. Qin Weibai narrowed her eyes slightly and looked softly at Li Tianlan in Raining Sword's hand. Let's go back. The task is completed. Raining Sword said softly. Let go of her. A weak voice sounded. Li Tianlan struggled to break free from the control of Raining Sword and stood shakily in the air. His voice was weak, and he seemed to fall at any time, but there was a hint of relief in his eyes, or the glow of success. He finally got close to Qin Weibai. Finally got close. Raining Sword and Moonlight looked at each other and laughed. Let go? Why? You're in our hands. Who can save her now? I can. Li Tianlan said softly. He looked at Qin Weibai with soft eyes. You don't deserve it. Moonlight's tone was cold and mocking. Young heavenly son? That's all. What about the wind and thunder veins? So what if you're talented? You're still a prisoner of the Jianghu family of South America. You practice martial arts, but you can't protect your own woman. What's the use of martial arts? She paused, as if she wanted to completely break Li Tianlan's will, and said coldly, it's better to give up. Li Tianlan laughed softly. His body gradually stopped swaying, and his crimson eyes became rational and clear. His eyes moved from Qin Weibai to Moonlight. He practiced martial arts, but he couldn't protect his own woman. What's the use of it? He was the heavenly son. He pursued perfection, a perfect foundation, and invincibility in the world. But now he couldn't even protect his own woman. What was the use of pursuing those? From the moment he saw Qin Weibai, he knew that everything about him was an illusion. Only she was the most real. The road to invincibility was long. The enemy was ahead. It was better to give up. Li Tianlan closed his eyes and whispered, it's better to give up. In an instant, Li Tianlan's voice rang throughout the battlefield. The soft, almost whispering words echoed clearly and terrifyingly between heaven and earth. It's better to give up. For simple words, but unprecedentedly clear and majestic. In the center of the battlefield, Tribulation, who was being crazily attacked by Shinichi Miyamoto and Tianyu, suddenly turned back and desperately rushed to Li Tianlan. Shinichi Miyamoto's eyes were solemn and sharp. The void formed again in front of him. Void, stillness, destruction. The pitch-black void instantly exploded, turning into countless destructive light spots. Tribulation suddenly turned back. In an instant, the aura he deliberately suppressed suddenly began to be released without reservation. Tribulation's figure began to blur and fade. But in an instant, countless shadows formed around him. 3, 5, 8, 9, one shadow after another appeared around Tribulation. The air around Tribulation exploded completely and became void in an instant. The shadows glowed in the void, shining brightly. Tribulation raised his hand. In front of him, the 9 shadows raised their hands at the same time. Kill. Tribulation's low and hoarse voice suddenly rushed to the sky. 9 shadows, together with himself, rushed to Shinichi Miyamoto. The void around them became completely fragmented in an instant. 9 glowing shadows appeared around Tribulation and rotated wildly. His figure became fainter and fainter, but his whole body emitted unparalleled light. Shinichi Miyamoto began to retreat. At this moment, the only thing he felt was fear. A large amount of air, along with heaven and earth, pressed down with the 9 rotating shadows. Tribulation seemed to break through the shackles, and his aura suddenly soared. He was invincible. He broke through. All the shadows became more and more dazzling. Tribulation's figure rushed to Shinichi Miyamoto, like a burning falling star, and hit Shinichi Miyamoto at all costs. The extremely strong aura climbed to the peak in an instant and fell quickly in the violent fluctuations of power. The light in the air dissipated. Tribulation's figure fell from the sky, and no one knew whether he was dead or alive. Shinichi Miyamoto, there was no Shinichi Miyamoto. Countless white bones also fell from the sky. Before they landed, they turned into a pile of dust in the night wind. Tribulation couldn't stop what he wanted to stop after all. The moment the strong aura of the 2 people's desperate attacks fell, another aura rose from the north. Li Tianlan released all the shackles. At the same time, he used the unique skill of the Wang family of Beihai. Against the way of heaven. He wasn't afraid of death, so why should he be afraid of going against the way of heaven? Under everyone's gaze, a vast sword intent suddenly rose up from the junction of the mountains and seas in the north. The sword light rushed to the sky thousands of meters high, covering the night sky, the barren mountains, the sea, and almost the entire battlefield. It's better to give up. That very young voice once again spread calmly throughout the battlefield and kept surging between heaven and earth. The sword intent surging throughout the battlefield kept roaring. In the north, high in the sky, the figure stood there quietly, holding half of the broken silver sword in his hand, but his whole body exuded a desperate and shuddering aura. His clothes were as white as snow. Chapter 253. It seemed to be rising with all its might, but it also seemed to be the last ray of light before the end of its glory. When the unparalleled sword light swept across the entire battlefield, the entire world seemed to have fallen into a deathly silence. The sharp light and shadow swept across the night sky, and all the sounds disappeared completely. The crowd was still fighting, but it was silent. Only Li Tianlan's voice echoed between heaven and earth. It sounded like a sigh, and a murmur, but it had a kind of power that hit the soul directly. It's better to give up. At the junction of the mountains and the sea, the high sky was completely boiling. The night sky within hundreds of meters fluctuated violently like a tsunami as Li Tianlan spoke. The vast sword energy surged. The sword intent fell from the sky, rose from the ground, and gathered from every space in all directions. The air was minced bit by bit and then pushed out by the surging sword intent. The air in the night sky hundreds of meters disappeared completely. The void didn't appear. Only the majestic sword intent and sword energy kept intertwining, as vast as a domain. Li Tianlan's body was no longer shaking. His aura kept rising, from the half-step thunder-shocking realm to the real thunder-shocking realm in an instant. Li Tianlan moved his body as if in pain, and his rising aura paused slightly. The next second, the slightly paused aura suddenly began to rise up endlessly, as if it was going to fill the world and break through the clouds. The stabilization phase of the thunder-shocking realm. The peak of the thunder-shocking realm. The full closure of the thunder-shocking realm. The half-step invincible realm. Keep going up. Li Tianlan seemed to have emptied all the sword intent between heaven and earth in an instant. The boundless sword energy suddenly boiled and lit up the whole battlefield. The unique technique of the Wang family of Beihai. Against the way of heaven. Wang Xingxiao once taught him this unique technique, but he tore it into powder and threw it away. His against the way of heaven came from Wang Yuetong. Under the invincible realm, this unique technique's unique and almost tragic way of exerting force was enough to upgrade anyone to a big realm. But the higher the realm, the stronger the power, and the greater the price. When Wang Yuetong was in the ice-condensing realm, she could temporarily obtain the combat capability of the fire-flaming realm by using against the way of heaven. Afterward, she just needed to rest. Wang Xingxiao could also use against the way of heaven to make himself a superior of the half-step invincible realm in an instant, but he dared not, or was unwilling to pay such a heavy price. But for Li Tianlan, at this point, there was nothing he couldn't pay. After taking the immortality potion, he forcibly restored himself to the thunder-shocking realm. In the thunder-shocking realm, he directly used the against the way of heaven to forcibly push himself to the height of the half-step invincible realm. But everything didn't stop. When the sword light lit up, the huge vitality accumulated by the immortality potion in his body began to be consumed violently without warning, and another kind of potion began to burst out under the consumption of vitality. It was the Surge potion. Surge, eternal life, defying the heavenly Tao. Faintly discernible, the three seemed to have formed some kind of subtle connection. His aura kept soaring, and countless vitality was consumed. After breaking through the half-step invincible realm, there was almost no pause. He had already broken through the threshold that was enough to make most geniuses despair. The dazzling sword light in the sky became completely stable. Reigning Sword, who was closest to Li Tianlan, could clearly feel the power and emptiness of Li Tianlan soaring to the highest point. Foundation. The deep and almost perfect foundation that Li Tianlan had attached importance to for countless years completely collapsed in an instant. It was better to give up. His combat capability rose wildly, but his realm plummeted in an instant. He slipped from the peak of the ice-condensing realm to the chi-controlling realm, and finally fell out of the chi-controlling realm and continued to slide. But Li Tianlan had risen to the highest point with the powerful combat capability that he had exchanged for infinite vitality. The highest place. Looking down from this position, the world was quiet. It was quiet. Everything happened too fast, and he couldn't resist or stop it. Reigning Sword, whose face changed dramatically, wanted to pull out the sword and rush to Li Tianlan. Moonlight, whose eyes were frightened, subconsciously wanted to tighten the chain around Qin Weibai's neck. They wanted to open their mouths and make a sound. But the world was quiet. They couldn't move or open their mouths. Li Tianlan glanced at them. His eyes were a little tired, but they exuded a kind of disdain and arrogance that despised everything in the world. White clothes, white hair, and a broken silver sword. The Jianghu family of South America should be killed. Li Tianlan said. He raised the sword edge. When I pull out the sword, everyone in the world is a nonentity. When I pull out the sword, everything in the world is under my feet. The sword intent that covered every inch of space began to stir quietly. A breeze blew in the air. The slightly turbulent sword intent became unprecedentedly brilliant. The frightening sword light suddenly exploded in the sky, rushed to the sky thousands of meters away, and turned into a dazzling beam of light that crisscrossed the sky and the earth. Reigning Sword of the Half-Step Invincible Realm. Moonlight of the Half-Step Invincible Realm. The crowd around the Jianghu family of South America, the beam of light spread up and down and expanded in an instant. The blazing white light shone into the mountains and the sea. Wherever the light passed, everything turned into nothingness. The low hillside became flat, the nearby seawater evaporated, and the crowd disappeared silently. The world was quiet. The beam of light that reached the sky dissipated. In the night sky, the white clothes and the white skirts snuggled together, calm as ever. Li Tianlan held Qin Weibai tightly in his arms, smelling the delicate fragrance from her body, and his eyes were peaceful. Everything was over. Zhongzhou State's plan, the final battle of Chengdao, everything. The moment the sword light lit up, everything was over. Li Tianlan looked into the distance. After the tide rose, the tide fell. The sea was calm. Li Tianlan looked into the distance. After all, he couldn't cross the sea in front of him, couldn't return to Zhongzhou State, to the forest and camp that filled most of his memories. Li Tianlan felt a little regretful, a little guilty, and a little reluctant, but he didn't regret it at all. He wouldn't regret it until he died. He gently stroked Qin Weibai's neck with his palm. The blood stained his fingers, and they were a little wet. Does it hurt? Li Tianlan asked softly. It hurts. Qin Weibai held Li Tianlan's body tightly and whispered. I'm here. Li Tianlan's tone was calm. Qin Weibai quietly hummed and raised her head to look at Li Tianlan. It's okay. She gently stroked Li Tianlan's face with her slender white palm, and her tone was gentle. Li Tianlan smiled, took her hand, and said, Watch the starry sky with me. The world was quiet. But the starry sky was bright. He put one hand around Qin Weibai's waist and took a step forward. The sea was getting farther away, and the mountain was getting closer. The roar became loud again, and there was a lot of noise. Qin Weibai frowned slightly. Quiet. Li Tianlan said. His voice echoed between heaven and earth, and the whole battlefield froze for a moment. The battle was still going on, but the sound was completely suppressed. Li Tianlan lifted the broken human emperor in his hand, and the sword edge trembled slightly. A sharp light that pierced through heaven and earth suddenly shone between heaven and earth. The sharp light rushed into a piece of blue lightning, which shattered instantly, and the battle came to an end. The figures of Ice Crystal and Frost Sword of Kunlun City appeared after the lightning. In front of them, Glacier and Tide, and the 2 imperial guards of the half-step invincible realm had disappeared. There was no blood, no wailing. The sword intent swept over, and everything just disappeared and shattered as if it had evaporated. Ice Crystal, who had lost an arm, looked pale. Ice Frost supported him, and their bodies trembled violently. They were one of the top experts of Kunlun City, and also one of the faces of Kunlun City. But in the face of Li Tianlan, they had no confidence to maintain the so-called courage and dignity. Li Tianlan stood there, but he seemed to be standing on the highest position and looking down. That kind of majesty, that kind of strength, was enough to make anyone desperate. Li Tianlan held Qin Weibai in one hand, and the sword in the other. The sword and the beauty were everything, and they were the world. Ice Crystal and Ice Frost pay respect to your highness. Ice Crystal and Frost Sword bowed deeply, and said in a trembling but respectful tone. Your highness. This wasn't an honorific for status, it was an honorific for power. And status and power were the same thing in the dark world. No one knew whether Li Tianlan was in the invincible realm or not, but everyone knew that Li Tianlan was absolutely invincible. He was your highness. Li Tianlan did not stop and left with Qin Weibai. Ice Crystal and Frost Sword, the 2 experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm of Kunlun City, bowed deeply to Li Tianlan's back in awe and humility. The sword light lit up again in everyone's sight. The broken silver sword looked short and shabby, but in Li Tianlan's hand, it had a kind of sharpness that could easily pierce the whole world. The huge head of King Bear of the Polar Ground Alliance flew into the sky. His eyes were wide open, and he died with a grievance. Wang Xingxiao, covered in blood, was supported by the enchantress. He looked at Li Tianlan with a complicated expression. No matter how proud he was, how unwilling he was. In the face of the invincible realm, he should also be in awe. Wang Xingxiao slowly bent down and said softly, Your Highness. In his voice, Holy Light, the head of the 8 Knights of Knights Templars, was smashed by the sword light. The body of Ben, the vice president of the Heroes Club, fell from the air. Li Tianlan saw Gong Sun Qi. Gong Sun Qi, who was seriously injured, had joined his terracotta army. The terracotta army of Jianghu state was called an army, but a quarter of its strength, including Gong Sun Qi himself, was only 6 people. Gong Sun Qi was facing a huge monster wrapped in alloy armor. That was the captain of the Kusanagi army. The sword intent fell in the air with a loud bang. A crack as long as 100 meters appeared on the ground. The huge alloy armor flew into the sky and shot out in the surging sword intent. Before it landed, it had become dust. Li Tianlan wandered in the battlefield with Qin Weibai. One after another, barriers that made everyone in Jianghu state feel desperate and powerless disappeared and were broken. The experts decreased one by one. The elites disappeared in droves. The man in white walked through the starry sky with the beautiful woman of Jianghu state in his arms. His every move was majestic and magnificent. Everything was actually over. When the sword light in Li Tianlan's hand lit up, it was already destined. One man, one sword. Turning the tide. Just one sword. They were all non-entities. Li Tianlan, have you never thought about the future when you do this? The crow of fantasy world fled to the distance with all its strength and roared angrily. The sword light chased after the crow. The thunder in the distance flashed for a moment, and then there was no sound. What I regret most now is that there is no future. Looking at the direction where the crow's body disappeared, Li Tianlan whispered to himself. Tianlan, be careful. Evil of the Jiang family of South America is also here. He has the legend of Qin in his hand. Qin Weibai reminded him in Li Tianlan's arms. The legend of Qin. It was one of the 12 murderous weapons and belonged to the Jiang family of South America. It appeared here. The one in Huading of Jianghu state was undoubtedly fake. Li Tianlan's eyes flickered and he said yes. Daybreak, who was also in white, appeared in front of Li Tianlan. His eyes were complicated and sad. In front of Li Tianlan, he bowed deeply and said in a trembling voice, "Your Highness." Li Tianlan nodded. "We meet again." Daybreak raised his head with regret and despair on his face. They didn't protect Huawu or Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan had no future. Where was their future? "It's okay," Li Tianlan said. He took a step forward and appeared directly in front of Saint. He let go of Qin Weibai's waist and turned to look at her face. Qin Weibai's eyes were affectionate and persistent. Li Tianlan smiled. His smile was as bright as the white clothes on his body, spotless. "The starry sky is beautiful," he said, "but you are more beautiful. It's going to be okay." Qin Weibai's voice was very soft, but she spoke very firmly. "Junior, do you really think you are invincible?" A thunderous roar reverberated throughout the world and reverberated incessantly. A figure flashed in the distance, and the saber light broke through the air. Tianhai Wuji, the master of Wuji Palace, appeared on the battlefield. Not far from him, Luxing Xianxia, the master of Jifeng Sword Training School, also appeared in the sky. Two invincible realm experts. And an invincible realm killer with a murderous weapon was hiding in the dark. Li Tianlan turned around calmly and said softly, "I'm going to kill them." He looked at Qin Weibai and said regretfully, "It's a pity that I can't help you vent your anger. The Jiang family of South America is too far." The Jiang family of South America was in South America. It was even farther away from East Island than the sea between East Island and Zhengzhou State. "Trust me." Qin Weibai held Li Tianlan's cold hand and looked into his eyes. "You won't die." "Okay." Li Tianlan laughed. His clear voice sounded in the night sky and kept echoing. "After this battle, if I can survive, Li Tianlan, swear to this mountain and see that I'm not a human being if I don't destroy the Jiang family of South America in this life." A pledge of eternal love was nothing more than this. "You? Just with the broken sword in your hand?" A voice sounded in the void, misty and vague. It was an evil voice. Li Tianlan slowly lowered his head and looked at the broken human emperor in his hand. After a long time, he said softly, "This sword doesn't deserve it. Then I'll use this one." A voice sounded in the distant sea. He swore to the mountain and sea. The mountain and sea responded. Huge waves suddenly rose on the calm sea in the north. Big waves hit the sky. "Then I'll use this one." The calm and complicated voice kept echoing in the air, and the whole sea nearby seemed to be surging under the voice. A shocking rainbow suddenly lit up in the distant sky in the north. The rainbow rushed to the sky with manic sword intent, with a long flame tail, like a meteor breaking through the sky. Between heaven and earth, above the sea, a scarlet light that stunned the night sky lit up. The red light passed through the sea for thousands of meters and kept flying in the air. The sharp sword intent pushed back the sky, as if it had traveled through hundreds of years, and finally fell into Li Tianlan's hand. It was a long sword that was scarlet in color. The blade was slightly wide, with a thin line in the middle. It seemed to be a broad-edged sword composed of two swords. The long sword edge stretched out in a straight line from the hideous hilt, with a sharpness that could tear the world apart. Li Tianlan was surrounded by sword intent. The red long sword seemed to have intelligence. It kept trembling in Li Tianlan's hand, as if it was excited and jumping. In an instant, Li Tianlan did not move, but the shocking sword intent suddenly flew up. Li Tianlan closed his eyes and held the sword edge tightly, with tears streaming down his face. He did not expect to see this sword and feel the sword intent when the light of the Li family was about to be completely extinguished. That was the sword intent of the same origin as the 24 moves of sword. Lin Fengding's figure appeared in his sight. He looked at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan looked at the sword with a complicated expression. This was the sword of Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun. It also belonged to the Wang family of Beihai a long time ago. This sword. Chapter 254. Lin Fengting went straight to Chengdao as soon as something happened in Huading. The elites of East Island who successfully broke out of Huading took the sea and land route, and so did Lin Fengting. They almost arrived at the battlefield one after the other, and their speed couldn't be slower. But it was still too late. It was too late. Lin Fengting's eyes were filled with disappointment. In his sight, the soaring sword intent brought by Li Tianlan and his sword gradually converged, but the sharpness that pervaded the sky was almost frozen. It was a pride and sharpness that could easily tear everything apart. One man and one sword were the entire world. The rest were just ants. Li Tianlan walked to the sky, step by step. His figure was stable, but it was like the edge of a sword was trembling slightly. At this moment, the scarlet sword and the snow-white figure seemed to merge into one, difficult to distinguish. The battlefield became quiet again. Tianhai Wuji and Wuxia Xianxia stood together and looked at Lin Fengting solemnly. They didn't know Lin Fengting, but he borrowed the sword from thousands of meters away. This kind of means was at least at the invincible realm. The sword was lent to Li Tianlan. For East Island, Lin Fengting was definitely not a friend. On the battlefield, one was either a friend or an enemy. There's no need for this, Lin Fengting finally spoke. He looked at Li Tianlan. This hermit, who had always been unrestrained and free in the past, sounded a little weak and sad at this moment. At this moment, the sharpness of Li Tianlan's body moved even him. This was the real invincible realm, and it was enough to be listed on the divine list. This year, Li Tianlan was only 19 years old. How dazzling was the light! But this was also the last light of the Li family for hundreds of years. How dim was it? Li Tianlan suddenly remembered a saying. He asked softly, "Senior, do you believe in heaven's will?" The corner of Lin Fengting's mouth trembled. He looked at Li Tianlan and was speechless for a moment. "This is my fate." Li Tianlan said calmly, "If I can live." He paused for a moment, then laughed self-deprecatingly and clenched the heavenly punishment in his hand, which had not appeared for hundreds of years. "Thank you, Senior," he said. "You don't owe the Li family anything, so that's it." Lin Fengting was a little hesitant, but he finally asked, "What else do you want to say?" The 19-year-old Li Tianlan could hardly bear the power of the thunder-shocking realm under normal circumstances, let alone the invincible realm. Li Tianlan could stand now because of the support and consumption of the huge vitality of the immortality potion. Everything was already irreversible. No matter how strong the immortality potion was, it was impossible to support the continuous squandering of the power of the invincible realm. When the vitality in his body was exhausted, his life would naturally come to an end. If he could survive, how could he live? No. Li Tianlan shook his head. In the most glorious and lonely afterglow of his life, he seemed very pure and indifferent. When a person was about to die, how could there be so many afterlife matters? He couldn't bear to part with some people, and he let some people down. He had regrets, guilt, and reluctance. But since he couldn't change anything, he didn't say anything. Lin Fengting was silent. After a long time, he nodded and looked in another direction. His eyes were calm but deep. Somewhere in the distance, Wang Tianzong, the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai and the number one on the divine list, stood on a dark mountain and looked at Lin Fengting. They looked at each other calmly without any emotion. Behind him, Jianghu and the entire Heaven's Punishers stood silently, as if they were one. Lin Fengting looked away. He didn't look at Wang Tianzong or Li Tianlan anymore. In Li Tianlan's current state, Wang Tianzong wouldn't and couldn't make a move. In his current situation, even if Li Tianlan drank all the immortality potion of the Wang family of Beihai, it wouldn't change anything. Because to some extent, part of the main reason for Li Tianlan's current irreversible state was that he drank the immortality potion and the bottle of surge potion. Lin Fengting's figure disappeared. He wouldn't make a move because it couldn't change anything. If it couldn't change anything, then it wasn't something he needed to do. "Master, Martial Uncle Lin is angry." Jianghu watched Lin Fengting's figure disappear and said in a low voice. He was no stranger to Lin Fengting. When Lin Fengting visited Mount Dibing many years ago, he had the idea of taking him as a disciple. At that time, the Jiang family of the Wang family of Beihai was also a little tempted, but in the end, they changed their minds because of Wang Tianzong's words. Instead of going to the Lin clan to guard the gate, it's better to stay in the North Sea and develop the country. From then on, Jiang Hongwei, who was still very young or even young, became the only disciple of Wang Tianzong and became the present Dijiang. He's always angry. Wang Tianzong said indifferently, it has been many years. Dijiang didn't say anything else. He didn't dare to. Wang Tianzong was still staring at the direction where Lin Fengting disappeared. The Lin clan shunned the world and did not enter the Jianghu. Even if Wang Tianzong had 1,000 words, he could not say them. In fact, he really wanted to tell Lin Fengting that there were some things that he really didn't understand. He also didn't understand the game and implications behind those friendships. Once one entered the Jianghu, even if one was a prodigy and invincible, there were still things one had to do and things one had to do. There was no quick revenge in the Jianghu, only involuntary actions. No matter who it was. But when he saw Lin Fengting disappear in front of Li Tianlan with his own eyes, Wang Tianzong knew that Lin Fengting didn't understand it, but he didn't need to understand it. That was because the Lin clan shunned the world and did not enter the Jianghu. That's Li Tianlan? Dijiang suddenly said. From a long distance, he looked at Li Tianlan's direction with a strange look in his eyes. Wang Tianzong nodded. What do you think? He's very strong. I'm far from his match. Dijiang shook his head. I originally wanted to find him alone and use our secret channel to catch him and take him to Beihai. Unfortunately, I didn't find him at that time, but I met the military counselor of Samsara. His eyes narrowed slightly, and he was a little confused. Wang Tianzong took a deep breath and said calmly, it's not necessary now. He looked into the distance. Li Tianlan turned around in the distance, holding divine punishment tightly. There were less than 200 people left in Zhongzhou State. Li Tianlan stood in front of everyone in Zhongzhou State and moved forward. He moved forward alone. The whole battlefield was retreating. Reigning Sword died, King Bear died, Holy Light died, Ban died, and Crow died. The people in charge of the 5 superpowers had all been wiped out. The elites of the 5 superpowers instinctively began to move toward the team of East Island. This was no longer their war. This was the war of the invincible realm. Even a superior at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm had to find the right time to intervene in such a battle. The battlefield was retreating. Tianhai Wuji and Luxing Xianxia looked at each other and moved forward at the same time. You are no match for me. Li Tianlan's tone was calm and sure, like a verdict. Arrogant. Tianhai Wuji sneered and said, you want to challenge the 3 invincible realm experts? Ants. Li Tianlan raised divine punishment in his hand. 3 ants, come with me. The 3 of them are ants. What about me? A voice rang from afar. The accent of the voice was strange and stiff. But as the voice rang, the whole world suddenly roared. A sharp and crazy killing intent surged from afar, blotting out the sky and covering the earth. A figure approached quickly and became clear. A man with long red hair as red as blood appeared in everyone's sight. The red hair flew in the night, and the killing intent swept over. A tall Western man appeared on the battlefield. He had long red hair, scarlet eyes, and blood-red clothes. He appeared on the edge of the battlefield and walked toward Li Tianlan step by step. It was a very old-fashioned pace, methodical. He walked silently, vaguely giving off a sense of evil and solemn solemnity. A silver cross hung on his chest. The cross shook gently, reflecting the dim light in the night. Aldak? Tianhai Wuji frowned slightly. His voice, which seemed to be talking to himself, reverberated in the whole battlefield. The battlefield was boiling, and the huge uproar suddenly formed a huge sound wave. Beside Saint, Qin Weibai narrowed her eyes, which were as cold as frost. Aldak. This was a name that almost everyone in the Dark World was familiar with. He ranked 9th on the divine list in the Dark World, known as the Killing Eye, the Killing Angel of the Vatican. His ranking on the divine list was far lower than Arcis, the Saint War Angel of the Vatican, but he was more famous than Arcis. In most of the conflicts between the Vatican and other superpowers in the Dark World over the years, Aldak's figure could almost be seen. There had long been rumors in the Dark World that if Aldak had not been so murderous, when the Vatican established the Knights Templars, Aldak would probably have been the leader of the Knights Templars instead of the current chaos. Tianhai Wuji ranked 8th on the divine list. Aldak ranked 9th on the divine list. Plus Luxia Xianxia an evil, the only killer of the invincible realm in the Dark World. And the murderous weapon, the legend of Qin. The general trend of Chengdao was almost completely formed in an instant, and it pounced on Li Tianlan with threatening gestures. His Majesty needs this person. Aldak smiled and pointed at Li Tianlan. He looked at Tianhai Wuji and said, I need to take him back. The His Majesty he mentioned was only the Pope. Tianhai Wuji looked at Li Tianlan expressionlessly and didn't say anything. It was useless to say anything at this time. The most important thing was to take down Li Tianlan first. Aldak walked into the battlefield. He appeared behind Li Tianlan, and his figure walked straight past the team of Jianghu State. Aldak's figure suddenly stopped, and he turned around to look at the crowd of Jianghu State. In the crowd, a pale girl stood there quietly, with clear eyes and a beautiful face. Aldak's eyes narrowed. Dongqing Rushi was also staring at him, without dodging. Illusion. Aldak suddenly opened his mouth and raised his eyebrows. He didn't hide his disgust at all, as if he wanted to slap an ant to death. Aldak suddenly raised his palm and blasted toward Dongqing Rushi. A surging sword light suddenly crossed the sky and the earth. The sword light spread in the air and instantly spread to the sky and the earth. The space seemed to be cut apart, and the sword intent that was sharp enough to break everything went straight forward. Li Tianlan held divine punishment in his hand and took a step forward. The aura that he restrained after entering the invincible realm completely burst out in an instant. He held the sword with one hand, and he was in high spirits. In the whole world, it seemed that he was the only one left, moving forward proudly between heaven and earth, sweeping away everything. That was a kind of invincible momentum. He was bloodthirsty, calm, and crazy. No one could stand in front of him. All living beings in the mortal world, gods and demons in the sky, disappeared under his sword. The sword light was getting brighter and brighter, and the sword shocked the sky. In the distance, Wang Tianzong, who had been watching the battlefield, suddenly contracted and condensed his eyes. He had seen this sword. Now he finally recognized this sword. The sword that had puzzled him for a long time. He subconsciously turned his head and looked in the direction where Lin Fengting disappeared. He didn't know if Lin Fengting saw this sword. He also didn't know if he would remember something. The sword light in the distance spread out to the limit. Wang Tianzong took a deep breath and whispered to himself, Samsara. Chapter 255. This was an unparalleled sword stroke. To some extent, this sword stroke could be said to have appeared in the Dark World for the first time. The scarlet sword edge was shining. The violent sword energy surged up and down in the air. The brilliant sword light of hundreds of meters almost brushed past the people of Jianghu State, with the inheritance and sword intent that had lasted for hundreds of years. Aldak's figure flew backward. The sword light swept past him and flew high into the sky. From a distance, it looked like a bright arc that seemed to cut the sky and the earth. The sword light rushed into the sky and cut the void. The dazzling sharpness and the starlight in the sky disappeared at the same time, leaving only darkness. Li Tianlan's figure appeared in front of the people of Jianghu State. Aldak's eyes were solemn and full of disgust. He was still staring at the direction where Dongqing Rushi was. The killing intent was rising and falling around him. You want to save her? Aldak looked at Li Tianlan and said in a cold voice. He was not handsome, and could even be said to be ugly. But no one felt that he was ugly when he stood there with a pair of red eyes and blood-red hair. It was a deep and extreme evil, exuding a power that made people feel fear from the bones. "I'm going to kill you." Li Tianlan's tone was almost casual and indifferent. Aldak's heart skipped a beat. From Li Tianlan's words, he did not hear the slightest anger or even the killing intent. All he felt was confidence. The kind of confidence that didn't take anyone seriously. "After I enter the invincible realm, I will be invincible in the world." Aldak smiled somewhat cruelly. He was ugly. When he smiled, his red eyes narrowed, and his whole face was distorted. He pointed in the direction of Dongqing Rushi. "Do you know what she is?" Li Tianlan's eyes were cold. "Illusion is a sin. She blasphemed against our faith." Aldak's tone was cold and ferocious. "She should be burned at the stake." Aldak, the killing angel of the Vatican, was known as the Eye of Killing. No one knew what he saw in his eyes, and no one knew what illusion was. In the crowd of Jianghu State, Du Hanin turned her head and took a deep look at Dongqing Rushi. She didn't know what illusion was, but she was sure that Dongqing Rushi did want to kill Li Tianlan. Even though she didn't admit it. Dongqing Rushi was still confused. "I'm not your target?" Li Tianlan said coldly. He took a step forward, and the divine punishment sword in his hand trembled slightly. Aldak, Li Tianlan, Jianghu State. The three of them were not far from each other, but Li Tianlan was in the middle. For Aldak, it was like the end of the world. "It's you." Aldak took a step forward without flinching, a crazy and violent killing intent brewing in his body. "But when I bring you back to the church, I don't mind killing that heretic." Perhaps it was because the sentence was too long, or perhaps Aldak's Chinese was poor, he spoke in English. Li Tianlan didn't understand. There was nothing more to say, so he just drew his sword. Aldak's footsteps stopped. Li Tianlan suddenly raised the long sword in his hand. The starry sky was brilliant. The surroundings instantly became silent and dark. Within a radius of dozens of meters, all the light and air were forcibly squeezed out at once. Because the momentum was too fierce, the expelled air instantly turned into a terrible airwave. The airwave rose and impacted, and the entire remaining formation of Jianghu State suddenly began to retreat. Li Tianlan's figure was drowned by the absolute silence and darkness of the void. The sword light that had just lit up was completely dim. The void was silent. In the hot midsummer, the coldness advanced and retreated in the void. A cold current appeared in front of Li Tianlan. The endless coldness continued to spread in the void, and the sound of condensation began to be heard around. Aldak's eyes were solemn and bloodthirsty. Li Tianlan's strength was beyond his expectation, so he didn't hold back at the beginning of the fight. Go all out. This was his most powerful domain, a domain that was extremely condensed and shrank to a radius of dozens of meters, and also his most powerful unique skill. Ice-condensed tomb. The ghastly cold current suddenly broke out in the void. The void was frozen bit by bit. The dim sword light completely disappeared in the darkness. "Why don't you make a move?" Aldak suddenly roared, and his scarlet eyes looked at Tianhai Wuji and Wuxia Xianxia. "Kill!" There was a sudden flash in the distant sky. The saber and the sword were unsheathed in the night sky, with a clang that resounded through the whole battlefield. The saber light and the sword intent instantly approached Aldak's invincible domain. There was a dead silence in the ice-condensed tomb. A gust of wind suddenly appeared in the night sky. The gust of wind blew into the ice-condensed tomb. Tianhai Wuji held the long saber tightly, raised it above his head with both hands, and chopped down fiercely. The brilliant saber light was like a pouring river, surging and rushing to Li Tianlan, who was still carrying divine punishment. For Tianhai Wuji and Wuxia Xianxia, the remaining troops of Jianghu State were no longer a threat. Their biggest opponent was Li Tianlan. If they killed him, everything would be over, and there would be no more waves. The gust of wind was approaching. The gust of wind was approaching. Aldak smiled cruelly, and he was about to make a move to kill. The completely frozen void of ice-condensed tombs suddenly began to shake, and a large amount of cold current began to break and break. The sword intent suddenly appeared in the area of dozens of meters. The extremely terrifying sword intent appeared in the void. Divine punishment was no longer glowing, but it was still rising little by little. This sword was very light, far less than the weight of the human emperor, but it was as heavy as a mountain in Li Tianlan's hand. Aldak couldn't imagine what kind of sword intent was carried on the blade. The sword intent was completely boiling in the void. Retreat! Aldak suddenly roared, turned around, and left. The long sword in Li Tianlan's hand had been completely raised. 21st Blade Shatter of Land. In the map of God of War, the so-called mountains and rivers were the domains of the invincible realm experts. All the domains. Break. In an instant, ice-condensed tomb was completely torn up by the sharp sword intent. The crazy sword intent filled the whole battlefield, and a large area of the mountain was violently surging under the sword. Dense cracks appeared on the ground one after another. The cracks were deep and ferocious, spreading in all directions. The soaring sword energy passed through the mountain area and entered the sea. The calm sea instantly set off monstrous waves that were dozens of feet high. The waves rose and fell, slamming on the sea like a mountain. The three invincible realm experts rushed to the sky at the moment when the sword intent broke out. The legend of Qin, hiding in the dark, was still silent. Li Tianlan held divine punishment and rushed to the sky. The sword intent rose on the ground and stirred up the sky. After killing Li Tianlan, the last battle would be completely over. For Li Tianlan, this was also the last battle. Break the mountain and overturn the sea. Falling stars and falling moon. The figures of the three invincible realm experts were getting higher and higher. Li Tianlan's figure kept going up with the sword intent. The night covered Changdao, and the white figure that kept rising seemed to be the most dazzling light in the whole dark world. The messy footsteps sounded under the turbulent night sky of the sword energy. Figures appeared on the battlefield one after another, gathering with the people of East Island and the 6 superpowers. The elites of East Island who followed Tianhai Wuji and Luxing Xianxia to break out of Huading appeared on the battlefield. Not far away, Wang Tianzong and Dijiang were already close to the battlefield. Kill them. Wang Tianzong looked at the battlefield and said calmly, "Everything will be over." He waved his hand. Dijiang moved forward with a calm face. Behind him, the whole Heaven Punishment Troop took a step forward at the same time. Wang Tianzong looked at them with deep eyes. He didn't look at Dijiang, the troops of Jianghu State, or the elites of East Island. He didn't even look at the battlefield. He stood very high. So as far as his eyes could see, it was all rivers and mountains, the whole world. His rivers and mountains, his whole world. After today, everyone would know that the final winner of the national plot of Jianghu State was the Wang family of Beihai, or Jianghu State. The sword intent above the sky had gone completely wild. No one could see the situation of the Battle of the Invincible Realm clearly. The elites of East Island and the 5 superpowers started to move forward. They faced Jianghu State again. Without that young prodigy, their side was an overwhelming force. Jianghu State, you should be killed. At the front of the crowd, a relatively young superior of the half-step invincible realm walked forward slowly. He looked at the defeated soldiers in front of him, and his smile was cold and indifferent. Everyone in Jianghu State stood up and prepared for the battle with a calm face. The last battle. Another figure suddenly appeared in the air. A large area of air was twisting. Vast bolts of lightning fell from the sky like heavenly punishment. The thunderbolts finally condensed into a deep blue light beam from the countless electric lights. The light beam only left the sky among the crowd in the middle of East Island. A surge of power that made people despair instantly exploded in the crowd. There was a roar between heaven and earth. Countless elites of the 5 superpowers and East Island were completely drowned by the thunderbolts. Flesh and blood flew up, and there was a burning smell in the air. The thunderbolts fell. There was a large blank area in the crowd. Jiang's figure appeared on the battlefield. He stood under the several invincible realm experts in the air, but he looked down at all the people of East Island and the 5 superpowers. East Island, you should be killed. He squinted his eyes slightly, looking at the crowd below. Who are you? In the crowd, a young man who looked very young stood in the front, with vigilance and fear in his eyes. He was Crown Prince Rend. After Tianhai Wuji and Wuxia Xianxia left at the same time, the Crown Prince of East Island had become the person who could lead the battlefield. Uniform footsteps sounded before Jiang opened his mouth. In everyone's sight, hundreds of people, who looked like a whole, moved toward the battlefield step by step from afar. They were getting closer and closer. Their figures were getting clearer and clearer. Even the epaulets on their shoulders were getting clearer and clearer. Finally, someone called out their name in a trembling voice. That epaulet. It's the Wang family of Beihai. It's the Heaven Punishment Troop. The Heaven Punishment Troop. The silver epaulets reflected the light under the starlight, and the badges of firmament and sea made everyone's heart sink suddenly. The Heaven Punishment Troop. The ultimate troop of the Wang family of Beihai, 300 people, no more, no less. But these were 300 people whose average strength was close to the peak of the fire-flaming realm. It was the average strength. Who knew how many thunder-shocking realm and peak fire-flaming realm experts there were in this troop? The most important thing was that they were an organized troop, not 300 people randomly gathered. The instinctive tacit understanding formed after years of cooperation made the enemy feel even more terrible than their realm. The number of people in East Island was still more than that of the Heaven Punishment Troop, but how could the whole be compared with many scattered individuals? I'm Jiang. Jiang finally spoke. He smiled and said, Commander of the Heaven Punishment Unit. He looked over the crowd into the distance and said calmly, From now on, the Wang family of Beihai will take over the special warfare system of East Island. Sorry. A figure in white suddenly appeared in Jiang's sight. He appeared from afar, but quickly approached. A handsome, almost devilishly cold face appeared in Jiang's sight. We can't agree to this. He looked at Jiang and said indifferently, Daybreak, Sanluo Temple Master, asks the Wang family of Beihai to return to Beihai and Heaven Capital. He was not alone. Behind him, there was also a group of white figures. They were organized as one, and there were at least 100 of them. Jiang's eyes focused, but before he could speak, another voice sounded from another direction. Li Ming, Hall Master of the Life-Prolonging Temple, asks the Wang family of Beihai to return to Beihai and Heaven Capital. The sound came from the west. Jiang looked away. Another cold and proud voice rang out from the south. Phoenix, Master of the Deathless Temple, asks the Wang family of Beihai to return to Beihai and Heaven Capital. Jiang's expression turned completely solemn. Daybreak, dawn, Phoenix. Limitless, longevity, undying. He had never heard of these code names, nor had he heard of these forces. But the crowd behind them was not fake. Behind the 3 of them, there was a team of 100 people. And their momentum was no less than that of the Heaven Punishment Unit. They also had epaulets. There was a silver arc embroidered on each of their shoulders, like a divine blade. Heaven Capital? After a moment of silence, he looked at Daybreak, who appeared first, and asked. Among the 3 superiors of the half-step invincible realm, only Daybreak posed the biggest threat to him. Although Dawn and Phoenix were strong, Jiang was still sure to win. This is the place. Daybreak's tone was calm. This is Changdao. Jiang sneered and said in a sharp tone. From now on, this is Heaven Capital. Daybreak's tone was firm and steady. This is not the place where the Wang family of Beihai should come. In the whole world, there is no place that the Wang family of Beihai shouldn't go. Jiang looked at Daybreak and said word by word. He clenched his fists tightly and looked at Daybreak. Who the hell are you? Chapter 256. Purgatory of Heaven Capital. When it came to his own organization, Daybreak spoke very slowly with obvious awe and arrogance. No one had heard of this organization before, but in an instant, everyone carved this organization into their minds. This was the first appearance of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital in the Dark World. But they brought out a super troop that was no less than the Heaven Punishment Troop in terms of aura and number. The 7th day was nearing its end. The battlefield was silent. The elites of the Wang family of Beihai, Jianghu State, East Island, and the 5 superpowers, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. The 4 forces stood in different directions, all of them deep in thought. At this moment, everyone could clearly feel the general trend in the Dark World. Night spirit was annihilated. The Samsara Palace rose. East Island was turned upside down. The 5 superpowers entered East Island. A bloody battle broke out at the border of Jianghu State. Shinichi Miyamoto, an invincible realm expert, died. The young chosen one fought against 4 invincible realm experts alone. The mysterious but powerful Purgatory of Heaven Capital appeared in the Dark World. The general trend came head-on. The wind surged and the clouds surged. This was probably the most unstoppable trend in the Dark World in recent decades. After today, the entire Dark World would undergo great changes. Great changes were about to occur, and chaos was about to descend. Jianghu's face was solemn. His arm, which was much longer than an ordinary person's, hung down naturally and then clenched. There seemed to be a clap of thunder in the air. Jianghu's eyebrows arched as a towering battle intent erupted from his body and swept through the entire area. He was not as emotional as the others. The world was in chaos. But in the dark and cruel world of darkness, when had there ever been a golden age? The only thing he was thinking about now was that someone had stopped the Wang family of Beihai. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital seemed to want to monopolize the special warfare system of East Island. Jianghu State was plotting against East Island, and the battlefield almost involved half of the Dark World. Northern Europe, North America, East Island, and the borders were all fighting. Blood flowed like a river, and bones piled up like a mountain. At the last moment, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, which had never participated in the battle, wanted to reap the fruits of victory. Who could accept that? Jianghu's fists glowed. Blue lightning flickered in his fists before completely vanishing. He seemed to be bearing something too heavy, and his entire body suddenly sank down. You want East Island? Jianghu looked at Daybreak. His gentle face was still calm, but at this moment, he only gave people the feeling of wildness. A suffocating power that was enough to oppress him surged around him. You think you're worthy? I'm standing here. This is Tiandu. Daybreak looked at Jianghu calmly. You want to fight? As he spoke, the elites of Sanluo Hall, Hall of Immortality, and Hall of Undying moved forward at the same time. They were in different directions. Now that they were walking over, they seemed to be surrounding the Heaven's Punishment Troop. Then let's fight. Jianghu sneered and stepped forward. Boom! A thunderous roar suddenly rang out as the world trembled. Jianghu's figure appeared in front of Daybreak. A large area of air twisted and exploded crazily. The void began to appear indistinctly. The moment the pure black spread quietly, it suddenly turned into lightning that covered the entire sky. It was as if the lightning that could destroy the world did not strike down in patches. Large patches of light and shadow rose and fell continuously, and the battlefield trembled violently under the lightning. The battle of the invincible realm above was faintly discernible in the void. There seemed to be only lightning, loud noises, and daybreak in the whole world. In the lightning, Daybreak's figure was still clear. The lightning destroyed the world. But he seemed to be standing outside the world. Jianghu's figure came to Daybreak. In his sight, the pair of fists that could almost break everything smashed down with the most wild power along with the lightning. Jianghu was still in the half-step invincible realm, but what he showed at this time was no less than the combat capability of an ordinary invincible realm expert. Daybreak's expression was calm and relaxed. In terms of real combat capability, compared with Dijiang, he was indeed a little weaker, but only a little weaker. If they fought to the death, they would die together. What kind of gap was that? In Tiandu, he was not afraid to fight with Dijiang. But it was not necessary. He had a simpler and more direct way. Clenching his fists, he blasted over with endless power. Daybreak's whole body suddenly shook, and the lightning that was about to fall on him completely dissipated in an instant. Under the monstrous power, Daybreak's figure finally blurred for a moment. Then it was over. The lightning began to disappear. The loud noise suddenly dissipated. The battlefield was no longer shaking. Dijiang's figure was still standing in front of Daybreak. His fists blasted out, less than 5 centimeters away from Daybreak. But it was the distance between life and death. A gun appeared in Daybreak's hand. It was a blue gun, emitting endless mystery. The gun was like a short sniper, only over 1 meter long, only a little longer than Dijiang's arm. But the gun gave people the feeling that it was unusually heavy. The thick muzzle, the thick body, and every detail gave people a rough and cold feeling. The gun was silent. Daybreak held the silent gun forward and stabbed it directly into Dijiang's mouth. His face was calm, and his finger was placed on the trigger casually. The silent gun, the silent man. The picture froze completely for a moment. Only the gun in Daybreak's hand was changing. The blue body of the gun absorbed the starlight, and the blue became more and more brilliant, like a gorgeous shadow. There was no doubt that it was a murderous weapon. As long as Daybreak pulled the trigger, the power no less than the full blow of an invincible realm expert would completely burst out from Dijiang's mouth. Life and death were clear. Please ask the Wang family of Beihai to leave Heaven Capital. Daybreak held the murderous weapon and said in a calm tone, "You may not be reconciled before, but now your life and death are in my hands. For the combat capability of an invincible realm expert, what else is there for the Wang family of Beihai to be reconciled to?" Daybreak opened his mouth wide, and the muzzle was put in. For a moment, he couldn't speak, but his breath suddenly became heavy. "Do you dare to shoot?" A gentle and calm voice suddenly sounded. Without any warning, Wang Tianzong's figure appeared beside Daybreak. During the whole process, Daybreak didn't even have time to react. Wang Tianzong didn't grab the murderous weapon in Daybreak's hand, but just looked at him quietly. Daybreak knew that he had lost the chance. But he still didn't take back the gun. He turned his head and looked at Wang Tianzong with a strange look and a little relief. "It turns out that His Majesty is here." He nodded and said to himself, "That's right, Lin Fengting had appeared in East Island from Jianghu State. Why didn't Wang Tianzong come?" Wang Tianzong shifted his eyes and looked at the murderous weapon in Daybreak's hand strangely. The blue spear seemed to be really spiritual. The blue flame flashed, as if it felt threatened. The body of the spear became a little shorter again, but it became heavier. Wang Tianzong looked at it silently. He didn't look at the people from Jianghu State, nor did he look at the nonentities from East Island and the 5 superpowers. His appearance here had already explained one thing. Even if Li Tianlan was defeated and killed in the Battle of the Invincible Realm, the special warfare system of East Island would no longer belong to East Island. "It turns out that it's in your hands," Wang Tianzong said softly, "Amazing. You flatter me, Your Majesty." Daybreak's tone was flat and cold. "It's the murderous weapon that's amazing, not you." Wang Tianzong shook his head and looked at Daybreak. "You're not strong enough. If I want to kill you, you won't have time to shoot. Just like if the Wang family of Beihai wants to enter East Island, your so-called purgatory of Heaven Capital can't stop me." His tone was very gentle, but with a kind of spirit of a king descending to the world. "So, why do you want me to quit, this so-called Heaven Capital?" "Samsara Palace, Saint, please ask the Wang family of Beihai to quit Heaven Capital." "Samsara Palace, Military Counselor, please ask the Wang family of Beihai to quit Heaven Capital." 2 voices sounded almost at the same time. 2 figures appeared not far from Wang Tianzong. A black cloak covered their bodies. They looked at Wang Tianzong quietly, their eyes calm and deep. Samsara Palace. Military Counselor, Saint. There was an uproar in the camp of Jianghu State. This was the power that first joined hands with them to plot against East Island. But now, at the last moment, the super master of Samsara, who had never appeared on the battlefield, suddenly showed up and made his position clear. They chose to stand on the side of the purgatory of Heaven capital. Choosing the Wang family of Beihai meant continuing to cooperate with Jianghu State. Choosing the purgatory of Heaven capital, this was betrayal? For a moment, everyone felt suffocated. Wang Tianzong looked at military counselor and Saint calmly. I knew that your thoughts were not simple. He said blandly, using the whole dark world as a chessboard and tens of thousands of elites as chess pieces, you plan to play with several countries, several superpowers, and several invincible realm experts in the palm of your hand. Such a plan is generous. Who is the mastermind? Qin Weibai? Your palace master? Or the purgatory of Heaven capital? There is no plan. There is only fulfillment. Saint said in a bland tone. Wang Tianzong's layout was broad enough, but after all, he just got in touch with the plan of Jianghu State this time. If the plot against East Island was a plan, then the general trend behind the so-called plan could only be regarded as a half-step chess piece at best. Just a half-step. This was more than generous. Aren't you afraid that I will kill you? Wang Tianzong suddenly said, just you, even if you and the troops behind you, what can you do? I'm already here. I am here, and thousands of troops and horses, and I will kill them with one sword. Wang Tianzong, who had been quiet and hadn't really made a move for many years, finally showed the extraordinary atmosphere that belonged to the first on the divine list. The invincible realm expert was invincible in the world. Do you dare to draw your sword? Another voice suddenly rang out in the void. This voice seemed to come from the depths of the void and echoed in the whole world. No one could find his location. Wang Tianzong couldn't either. Time seemed to go back, to the moment when Wang Tianzong appeared. At that moment, Wang Tianzong asked Daybreak, do you dare to shoot? But this time, the person hiding in the dark didn't show up. Even Wang Tianzong didn't find his location. This voice didn't belong to the master of Samsara Palace. There was no doubt that it should belong to the superior of the invincible realm behind the purgatory of Heaven capital. Who is it? Wang Tianzong said in a calm tone, come out and meet me. Are you sure you want to see me? The voice in the void rang out once more. There was no emotion in it, and the words revealed an extremely pure indifference. Before Wang Tianzong spoke, a clear sound of friction had sounded. It was the subtle sound of the weapon being dragged on the ground and rubbing against the ground. But now, this subtle sound was spreading throughout the entire world in a subtle yet ubiquitous manner. The sound of friction gradually approached. The air began to turbulence. The sound of friction turned into a sound of breaking. The sound gradually expanded and suppressed the battlefield on the ground. At the same time, it instantly suppressed the mighty sword intent and the cracking sound of the battle of the invincible realm in the air. Only the sound of breaking friction sounded in the whole world, with the sharpness that had been hidden for many years. Puff! In the camp of the Heaven Punishment Troop, at the moment when the sound of friction gradually approached, several elite soldiers standing on the edge were directly cut into countless pieces by the invisible sharpness that filled the world without moving. The moment the blood mist rose, Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes with a cold expression. An irregular arc appeared in the void. It looked like the edge of a weapon, and it was completely black. The blade crossed the air, with the sound of friction echoing all over the world, becoming more and more obvious. All the elites of the Sanluo Hall, the Life-Prolonging Hall, and the Athanasia Hall began to bow deeply in one direction, looking pious and awestruck. The blade in the air was completely clear. A figure gradually became clear. It was so clear that people felt that the whole world around them was fake. Everyone seemed to become illusory in an instant. Only Wang Tianzong was still real. A black shadow slowly walked to the front of Wang Tianzong, stepping on the void as if walking on the ground. Everyone finally saw his weapon clearly, and great astonishment rose in the hearts of the crowd. It was a weapon that few people in the dark world used, or even no one used it at all. That was a scythe. A death scythe that was nearly 3 meters long. The sharp and irregular blade was curved, spreading horizontally for nearly 2 meters. He held the scythe, dressed in black, like a real death, powerful and almost irresistible. "What's your name?" Wang Tianzong's tone was calm, without sadness or joy. "Deity." The black shadow holding the death scythe said coldly, like a deity. Wang Tianzong didn't speak. "This is Heaven Capital." Deity's tone was indifferent, with irresistible strength. "Get out. Your weapon is interesting," Wang Tianzong suddenly said. "Do you want to have a try?" Deity's tone didn't change at all. It was indifference, as if he regarded everything as non-entities. "I never let myself regret." Wang Tianzong said, "Since you want to take East Island, let's bet on a sword stroke." "I have a sword stroke. If you can take it, I will get out of your Heaven Capital. If you can't, you stay here." This world doesn't need deity or the purgatory of Heaven Capital. Under the black cloak, Deity's head seemed to move. He looked at Wang Tianzong and said coldly, "Do it." There was no hesitation, no nonsense, no probing. Wang Tianzong pulled out his long sword with a calm expression. The sword was called Listen to the Sea. The whole mountain area suddenly became dead silent. The sea in the distance suddenly surged up. Wang Tianzong looked at deity in front of him, his eyes calm and emotionless. He had never seen the death scythe, but his intuition told him that the deity in front of him was somewhat familiar. He didn't want to test anything, and he didn't test anything with his sword. There was only life and death. Anyone who is my enemy deserves to die. Listen to the Sea slowly came out of the sheath. The bright sword light that could compete with the sun and the moon lit up. He bet on a sword stroke with the whole East Island. This sword stroke, you're tuning into the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.